Okay, let's talk about balancing perspectives. So in my experience, those communities that effectively deal with these issues understand that the iconic species are worth paying attention to. So everyone that has an opportunity to see grizzly bear or native cutthroat trout, I mean, they're just spectacular. And if you can keep them on your landscape, that's saying something about your landscape. But I think you have to back up and think about the bigger picture. And I think that we are often very good in Bragg Creek at reacting to issues, and we're going to have to take some of our energy and move it into proactive thinking. We're often tactical, and that's great, but we're going to have to complement it with strategic thinking. We often think about form without thinking about function, and we're all busy, so we think about short-term dynamics and not necessarily about long-term dynamics. And so when issues come, whether it be the flood of 2013 or logging or mountain lions eating our dogs, or we've got issue with bears, everyone pays attention. And those are symptoms of a system, and they require and deserve our immediate attention at a tactical level. And most recently, hundreds of people showed up to offer their views on the merits of logging this landscape. But I would argue that in addition to doing those things, which are all good, that we need to think more broadly and not get too tight and think about many of these causes that are causing the symptoms. And that's what I want to talk about today. It's a harder conversation. It's not as, in many ways, attractive. But for those communities that have actually successfully dealt with these issues, they take the time to understand these dynamics. So that's what I'd like to discuss. What I fear, and I've seen in Bragg Creek and many others, is that we can easily just burn up all of our energy and emotional capital by reacting to issue after issue after issue. So we're going to start by understanding the natural dynamics that drive the Greater Bragg Creek ecosystem. So people are interested in wildlife. Well, wildlife in a world without people is driven primarily by habitat. And habitat is driven primarily by plant communities. And plant communities are driven by disturbance regimes. In your landscape, it's been around for about 10,000 years since glacial ice sheets retreated, and an unimaginable volume of water over many thousands of years rushed east and carved this landscape the way it is right now and distributed so many of the materials. And ever since then, that landscape has not been static, it's been dynamic, driven by variances in climate and hydrology and natural disturbance regimes. So we need to understand that. So that's the template without people. And those things are still going on. But now we're in a world with a lot of people. And as we'll discuss, those natural disturbances are not the way they used to be. And anyone who was around in 2013 would understand that. So we need to focus on the key underlying ecosystem dynamics. So I'm going to spend a bit of time on this. We're going to talk about climate and hydrology and natural disturbances and how plant communities grow vegetation and how it changes through time succession. And we better be thinking about decomposition, nutrient cycling, and how our soils are formed. Now, I love grizzly bears, but I tell you, I'd give up on grizzly bears in a second before I'd give up on soil. And if you lose your plumbing and the basic dynamics of a system, you're not going to have grizzly bears. So we need to be thinking about the underlying ecosystem processes and how these landscapes are put together by all these patches of plant communities and how they're getting fragmented. Because I'm going to argue that if you can maintain the ecological processes, more often than not, these other ecosystem components that really attract our attention are going to come along for the ride. So if we want all of these kind of components, I don't know if we want a shark, but anyway, and if we want these pristine landscapes, the easy thing to do is just make sure the thing functions properly. So good function generally leads to good form. So about 5 days ago, I'm running all these analyses trying to figure out how does the Bragg Creek system work? You know, how burning fires across the landscape and letting plant communities grow and logging it and letting acreages be developed and pushing people around the landscape on mountain bikes. Trying to figure out how the water moves, how grizzly bears are moving across the landscape. So my headspace is completely in function and dynamics. And so my wife, who is down in the States visiting her mom in Indianapolis, so she phones, and so we're talking to each other, FaceTiming. And so I'm building all these slides and telling her all this exciting stuff, and I'm hoping she might ask me about ecosystem function. And so she blasts me "Oh, sweet Jesus and all the baby saints, run, do not walk to the barber." And apparently her mind was on form. And so being a dutiful husband, 25 minutes later I look like this. And it was kind of an aha moment. You know, we humans, I think, are wired to prioritize form over function. And anyone who's ever turned on a TV, I think, sees it, that we get all of these views of, quote, beauty, and maybe we spend less time thinking about the underlying functions and dynamics and interactions that actually form societies and give it integrity, right? And it's that approach we often take to our landscapes. Yeah, the vistas are spectacular, and I love them just as much as anyone, and I always love seeing grizzly bears. But leaves falling and decomposing, and the invertebrates that live in that litter, and how water moves through the landscape and recharges aquifers, and the role of wetlands and decomposition. These are the things that drive the system, and they escape our attention. So again, that's why we need to look at form and function. And we're going to start by going back.